So shall we start? Okay. Assalamu alaikum jami'an. Hello everyone. Good afternoon, or is it good evening? I think it's good afternoon. It's a pleasure to host Mr. Brent Weeks here at the Abu Dhabi International Book Fair. Brent has a very sweet intro on his website, which is different from anything I had read anywhere else when introducing an author. But you're going to have to read it on his website, because otherwise I'd be plagiarizing from it. I will use my own introduction. Brent Weeks was 2 months old when Star Wars was released. And so he missed it. Unfortunately, I was 12 at the time, so I didn't miss it. He graduated from college in 2000 with a degree in English. Yes, because we English graduates need to stick together. He has published 2 complete series. The Way of Shadows was a New York Times bestseller in April 2009, and each of his 5 books in his Lightbringer series have made the New York Times list as well, starting with The Black Prism in 2010, which I am currently reading, by the way, because I was just recently introduced to Brent's work. His books have been translated into no less than 14 languages. And The Way of the Shadows was also published as a graphic novel. You'll be interested to hear. He lives and works near Portland, Oregon, with the girl, Christy, his wife, and their 2 daughters. So please welcome Mr. Brent Weeks. You and I met on Zoom just less than a week ago, and we hit it off, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And when we met for the first time, I told you that I Googled you, stalked you, basically, and found your Twitter account. And that's when I found out that he has a shed to write in, a shed for writing. Okay, but before we go to the shed, I wanted to know, when was it exactly that you felt like you had to be an author, and why did you choose fantasy?
I think I wanted to be an author. I had the dream very young. When I was about 12 or 13 years old, I came across the writings of Edgar Allan Poe, and Poe is super weird, right? And his writings express a certain amount of loneliness. He felt underappreciated. He thought nobody understood him. He thought he was really great, but nobody believed it during his entire life. So he felt overlooked, isolated, alone, and in other words, exactly how I felt when I was 12. Yeah, absolutely, marginalized. And so I had this strange experience where I felt like the first true friend I had was this guy who had been dead for 150 years. And that was incredibly powerful to me. And I thought, that's cool, like that's really neat, like that I'm not alone in what I'm experiencing here in the world. I'm not like mentally ill or something, like these are feelings that other people in the human race have had. And it didn't solve my problems for me, but it made me feel no longer alone in my problems. So I immediately started writing. And of course what I wrote was terrible. I was 12 and 13 years old. So eventually I gave up the idea. And then I abandoned the dream. I let it die because I wasn't good on my first try. And then I kind of let it lie fallow until I was in college, and I did a semester in Oxford, and I took a creative writing class there. Obviously, in the intervening years, I'd read lots and lots and lots of books because I'd found this kinship. And so I took this creative writing class, and I was writing stuff every week, and it was still terrible. It was still bad, but other people in the class thought it was really good. And I was like, well, if I can fool them, maybe I can fool more people. And so I thought, I took the dream back up, and I thought, you know what, I probably don't have the skills to do this, but I am going to try. and I'm gonna try it while I'm young, and it's fine to be poor and young and not know anything and have a dream, and so I thought I'll just do this for a couple of years, and then when it doesn't work out, I'll give up on it.
When was this?
This was when I was. No, this was in 1997. I decided I'd try my hand at it, and I started writing a book, and so that finishes answering the first part of your question.
Yes,
that's not the
fantasy.
whole story, of course, but and why fantasy? The fantasy, in some ways, I feel fantasy has deep roots. Fantasy is, in many ways, the ultimate expression. That sounds pretentious, but the ultimate expression of what all fiction is. All fiction is you're entering a world that an author is creating for you. You're talking to people, or you're experiencing people who don't exist in ways that they probably didn't exist, speaking in ways saying things that they didn't actually say. And fantasy just takes that and says, why don't we make this impossible? Like let's take some impossibilities. And you see those things have roots all the way back to Homer. Like there's Greek gods going around and they're intervening in the spear fights. And it's like you want Athena on your side if there's a spear fight. And you never want to get caught judging a beauty contest between goddesses. So those are always good lessons for us now. So fantasy to me is kind of the inheritor of some of those things. We obviously have different tastes these days for what we want in our literature, but fantasy gives this really broad scope for the imagination.
Okay, I agree actually. I love fantasy. Even though I write science fiction and a lot of people think that I only chose science fiction, I prefer fantasy. Even though it's not as popular in the Arab world. Imagine the world that produced 1,001 Nights doesn't believe that fantasy is literature.
Wow.
Or science fiction, obviously. And we were just
that blows
discussing.
my mind.
Yes.
That's like that's your inheritance. That's like let's just leave that in the storehouse.
And
rather than going and using
totally
that gold.
Disrespect it as well,
Yeah,
and
right.
undervalue it, because we are now used to another kind of literature, and that is legitimate literature.
Gotcha.
That is pretentious in a way and representative, but the other side of it, which again is fictional and not real and made up, no, that part we can't respect.
Gotcha.
Unfortunately. And I was just mentioning to Brent that during a session with Brandon Sanderson, also a fantasy and science fiction writer, an Arab in the audience actually stood up and asked him, so you write fantasy and you write science fiction, but that's not literature. It's not respectable literature. You weren't there, Metha. I got really angry. But then Brandon Sanderson answered a really good answer, and he said, Shakespeare is classics, but it's mostly fantasy. It's not even realistic kind of fiction. So I love that answer that he gave. But this also tells me something about the things that are important to you. To me, for instance, it's very important for that book to be representative, etc., and fun. But to you, what would be worth your time reading? What would make a good book that Brent Weeks wants to read?
Okay. What makes a good book, in my opinion, is that's a tough question, because it's sort of like what makes a good person to meet. Like I might have a certain kind of people that I like to hang out with every week, and so for me that might be fantasy. That might be my comfort genre. But then there'll be people that I like to hang out with once in a while, and then there'll be people that I would love if I got to know a little better. So what makes a book good is one that shows a mastery of the techniques of the trade, and there's a lot of different techniques we use in all fiction writing, but there's really only one rule, And the one rule, I think, and I'd be interested to hear if anybody has some pushback on this, but because maybe I'm wrong. I think the one rule is that you must keep readers turning the page. And I like to say, it's okay if you take my book and you throw it across the room because you're so angry about what I just did, as long as you go and pick it back up. So there's a tension there. Like I can make you angry as long as I intrigue you enough that you want to be like, okay, I'm super mad about that, but I'm going to go find out about this one thing. I just got to figure out what happens to her because I really like her. He better not have done something bad to that character. So to me, a book should show some mastery of plot, of tension, of setting up the characters, of using language correctly. The dialogue should sound somewhat humanish, which dialogue is weird because people do not speak the way that people speak in books or in movies. Like you're looking for verisimilitude, that is life-likeness, not dictation. Like if somebody took this speech as I'm speaking to you right now and printed it out, I would be embarrassed because there's lots of stutters. That we have not been interrupting each other very much at all, but there's little places where there's lacuna. There's gaps. There's the way people actually speak is weird, and we de-weirdify it in a very artificial way that is weird, to make it look like it all makes sense. So when I'm reading fiction, when I'm reading a novel, I want to see that somebody's dialogue looks like it makes sense, which is to say it doesn't actually mimic life. It mimics life at one little remove to make it easier for us to understand. So those kind of things are techniques. But deeper than all that, I have read books that violate a lot of what I think of as rules. That introduce things in really weird ways. In fantasy, we deal a lot with information. You're learning about a whole new world. It's got its own mythology. It's got its own history. It's got its own politics. It's got all these relationships. The structure of the social status is all different. So fantasy works a lot with exposition. That is me teaching you about how this world works without you realizing it and without me lecturing you. So this book was breaking all of these rules. And yet it fascinated me, and it was because this man was following I think kind of a deeper truth, and that was he was telling the truth about the world as he saw it, and so he was writing from the heart, and whenever somebody speaks to you from the heart, that level of passion can cover over a million wrongs, right? It's like when somebody gives a speech and they're crying and they're telling you about the thing that's most important in their life. You forgive them that they don't have all the rhetorical devices, and it's like that is real, and what you're saying speaks to me. So what makes a book worth reading to me is somebody who's trying to tell the truth. Which is a strange thing to say for fiction, which is lies by definition, but it's somebody who's trying to communicate something that's real about their experience.
Yeah, and representative and true when it comes to the person who's reading it, because otherwise it's very false, and then it's funny how you mentioned a few things about what makes a good book. First of all, the structure, the form of it has to fulfill certain standards. And then it's the dialogue, and then it's the progression of things that happen, and you don't just jump here and there and things don't make sense. And I've seen a lot of manuscripts when it comes to manuscripts that were sent to my publishing house, where there is an information dump, which is very bad. Information dumps are very bad. But when I was a teenager, I used to read books that had information dumps all the time, but they were so interesting. So each stage or each era actually has its rules, but it's at the same time different people love different things.
Right. So there's a classic info dump in Star Wars, which you mentioned, right? Like what is that opening scroll, right? You watch the text go up, and info dumping is okay if used correctly, and that's interesting. The music is good, it's helpful, and finally the spaceship goes by, and I forgive that one because movies are a visual medium, and it's very hard to get across as much world building as fantasy requires. So what info dumps do, if they're done well, is they're like, this would take me forever to work into natural conversation, so I'm just going to give you a chunk of text. It's going to take us 1 minute. Just trust me. This is the fastest way to do this, and then we're going to move on. And so there's times where it's forgivable if the author has given you a reason, like maybe set up some tension beforehand, and then the professor sits you down and says, Harry, I'm going to tell you something I should have told you long ago. Well, now you're going to listen for like 50 pages, right? And yes, she does info dump for about 50 pages there, but you forgive it because it's set up in such a way. And so info dumping is okay, but only if set up artfully, really. So
it is an art. It is an art. Obviously, not everybody can do it.
So I had a question for you because you've been just directing everything to me. So you gave me an opening finally. You talked about your publishing company. So she did not introduce herself at all. So let me jump in and do this here. So this is Noura Al Noman. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce anything. So she is the first Emirati science fiction writer. She's a translator and also a publisher. She told me not to talk about her high-powered real job. And I'm not supposed to tell you about that, and I'm really trying. She will hurt me, and she still has a mic, so I won't talk about that. But you named your publishing company Manuscript 5229, and you didn't tell me why yet, and I want to know why.
Okay, thank you for asking me about this. In Arabic, it's مخطوطة 5229, which in English means manuscript. Now, you know Antonio Banderas. I always like to start with Antonio Banderas.
Of course, yes.
In 1999, he acted in a movie called The 13th Warrior. It had Omar Sharif in it. And it was about this Arab prince who met a group of Vikings. And he, for some reason, he went with them on this adventure where they killed an evil tribe, if you will. The movie is called The 13th Warrior, but it's an adaptation from Michael Crichton's Eaters of the Dead. Right. Now you know why they didn't call it that. Eaters of the Dead. So it's an awful name for a movie. So they called it The 13th Warrior. And the wonderful thing I like about Michael Crichton is that even though he writes science fiction, at the end of the book, you see a bibliography of all the science books he read in order to form his plot. So I saw that he had written that this character, Ahmed bin Fadlan al-Baghdadi, was actually a real person. He read about whom the Abbasid Khalifa, the Caliph of Al-Muqtadir Billah, that was his name, he had sent him as an envoy to the Volga. Okay. In the 10th century.
Really? Okay.
Not the Islamic calendar. And he spent a few months moving from Baghdad to the Volga, and he met a lot of nations, and he wrote about their culture and what he saw of their mannerisms. This book, in Ahmed bin Fadlan's handwriting, still exists in a museum. You love museums.
Yes, yes.
In Turkey. And the label on that is MS, manuscript, 5229.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, how this manuscript became a Hollywood movie. Right. And I thought it would be so good if it were to happen again and again and again.
I love that. I love that.
Thank you.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great.
And so I decided that it was going to be specifically for science fiction and fantasy and the rarer genres in the Arab world, because unfortunately when I wanted somebody to publish my book, Ajwan, it was very hard. I mean, it took me 8 months. Apparently, that's nothing compared to other people. It took me about 8 months, and it happened because at the Sharjah Book Fair, I met the chairwoman of Nahdat Masr, which is an Egyptian publisher. And we sat down and we chatted, and I told her I had a manuscript, and she said, sure, email it to me. And I emailed it to her, and within a month, they said, we'd like to publish your book. Now, what I'm really proud of is that they are the ones who translate and publish Harry Potter and The Lord of the Rings. It was the first time I ever heard that The Lord of the Rings was in Arabic, and I was 17 when I read them. So I was fortunate enough to meet this chairwoman and speak to her, but what about the hundreds and thousands of other writers who don't? So everybody is all over here publishing all kinds of genres, but very, very few care enough and are experienced enough to pick the right manuscript that's for science fiction and fantasy. And so I chose those genres. Also, at the same time, because it's a vicious cycle, because there aren't enough samples of science fiction and fantasy in Arabic, the ones that are available sort of teach future writers how to write in the same way, which is, I'm not going to say it's bad, I'm just going to say it is not as advanced as other countries because we just started recently. And so a lot of the manuscripts that I received via email, and you could tell, I could tell from reading them that this person has never read a science fiction book. I could tell, you could tell.
Right.
Right? And so I would ask them usually, so which books did you read, science fiction? And they would immediately say, no, I've watched a lot of science fiction movies.
Right.
Yeah, but that qualifies you to write a science fiction screenplay.
Right.
Not a book, because books are constructed differently from a movie script. And so in the end, I decided in order for someone to cook good pasta, they need to eat good pasta over and over again.
Right.
And so I decided to translate pasta.
Yeah.
That's my story.
I like that. No, this is like my early experience with fantasy was I read Tolkien, and he was amazing, and I would try something else, and this was in the 80s in America, and it would be bad, and it would be sort of like there were a lot of Tolkien kind of rip-offs at the time, and it was like, ugh, this is not good. And then I would go back and I'd read Tolkien again, and then I'd go read something else, and like everybody who tried to be Tolkien would fail because he basically spent 50 or 60 years of his life doing these books, like building the world from the time he was a child. And so people who tried to do his thing just flamed out, because you can't spend 2 years and write a trilogy and have it be the same as Tolkien's work. But it also spoke to where the market was. It's like there are a lot of books that were published then that would have no chance of getting published now, just because the market has been created on the backs of some of that. So Terry Brooks, his first book that came out was basically an imitation, kind of an homage of Tolkien, and except he told it all in one volume, in one slender volume, and that book sold like crazy. And in many ways, Terry Brooks really established fantasy as a genre in the United States. Like, publishers said, wait, they made a ton of money on this fantasy thing. We thought that was just Tolkien. We thought Tolkien had just done his own thing and nobody could do that again. And so the first generation of what those publishers looked for was not very good. But what it did is it created a market, and people were like, oh, you can write this stuff with magic and swords and have high adventure, and then as more people got to experience it, they started branching out and they started doing their own things. They're like, yeah, I tried to write a Tolkien thing when I was a kid, or when I was 20 years old, and then my next book, I really did my own thing. And so the art really matured, and in some ways matured really, really quickly in the United States, but it was because there were so many people writing it, and like the number of people who are writing these days, who are writing fiction in the U.S. is sort of ridiculous. My agent, he's a very good agent, but he he says he gets 10,000 submissions a year, and he takes on 3. He takes 3 of those on. So that is how much interest there is out there, and so it's like, of course, those 3 are going to be good, right? Like they're just having to compete with so much. But we're also exposed then. You know, we just had Nnedi Okorafor out here, and you've got the Africa Futurism. You've got. We publish fantasy from every corner of the world. You know, Don was just saying he's just recently done a Thai fantasy. He's done a Korean fantasy. He's done, you know, they've got the LGBTQ plus stuff is everywhere. They've done some Arabic world fantasy, and Don says Americans and American publishers want to publish this. They are hungry for it. He said at this time. Like like Don at least, among the ones that he sees, he says we kind of get 3 things. His agency kind of gets 3 things, and he thinks that it is more broadly in the market. He said we get Scheherazade, we get Aladdin, and we get genies, and the ones that get published usually do have some nice twist on that. But he said if you can dig a little deeper, and also a lot of those tend to be by American-born people who have roots here. So second generation Arabs, right, or Persians, or people who are second generation who are reaching for their roots. But sometimes those people write differently than an Arab would write. It's like you've grown up here. You know more about your own legends. It's like they're trying to connect with their legends. They're trying to connect with their roots. But like you're in your roots. And so it's like, can you tell me stories about things that are about your world? We want to experience that. We want to hear it. We want you to tell us the truth about your world, about the things you do. Can it not be those 3 things? Can you reach a little deeper? Just to differentiate, you know, it's like your culture is broader than those.
Absolutely.
And it becomes a caricature, and it's like we know there's more there. It made me think of the Kite Runner. Are you familiar with the Kite Runner? So that's I can't say the guy's name, of course, correctly,
yes,
but
Hosseini.
yes, so it's set in Afghanistan. And it's about this part of, or ostensibly, it's about this kite running. What's kite running?
Yeah.
We Americans have never heard about that.
Yes.
You know, it's like, what? That's a thing?
Mm-hmm.
So it's the Kite Runner. You're like, well, that's weird. Oh, it's set in Afghanistan? This is going to tell me something about Afghanistan. But it's not just a gimmick.
No.
It's like, it's a really good book.
Yeah.
And so that came out, and people were like, I want to hear about this part of the world that unfortunately, you know, was a conflict zone. Unfortunately, still is.
Yes.
I want to learn about that. I want to hear about your part of the world. And if you can do it well, if you can do it competently, as Hosseini did, it's like, you know, he spent two years, I think, or more in the top 10 of the bestseller list.
Yes.
He made millions and millions of dollars on that. So it's
Like
he connected. He made something real, and
book.
it's beautiful, and it did really well. So publishers in the West are really hungry for that stuff. The door is wide open, but it does require a certain level of technical prowess.
Absolutely, yeah. And this also brings up the issue of, and I don't want to keep repeating negative things, but you spoke about a creative writing workshop that you went to, and how influential that is in your life. And I think being here at the book fair, we need to remind all of the organizations in the UAE that creative writing sessions and workshops are very, very important. You cannot have books. Books don't just spring out of thin air or the ground. They need an entire ecosystem, the right kind of books, the right kind of teachers, the right kind of mentors, the right kind of workshops and sessions. Metha, you know how it is. Metha is a children's writer and is a good friend. And besides that also, and I spoke before about finding the right kind of samples that will help you write the same, and maybe the next time it'll be slightly better and then slightly better. Yeah. But look at the power of books. Look at the power of fiction. And non-fiction, you know, only certain people will go and read about Afghanistan. But one book, one fiction, made all of these people want to buy these books, and then they wanted to know more about the Afghani culture. You know, one thing that maybe not a lot of cultures share, but the Arabs know very well, is the importance of land, al-ard, in Arabic. Americans probably don't, you know, find that sacred, but the Irish do, and the Scots do. Land as a, I'm sorry, I'm not able to articulate it properly, but al-ard is your honor. Land is your honor.
Gotcha.
It is your identity.
Gotcha.
And that's why there's a lot of cultures where there is occupation, etc. And they are not there fighting off an occupier only. This is their honor that has been robbed from them.
Interesting.
And that's so Arab, you know, and it could be a theme for so many series and so many books.
Yeah.
And how that influences generation after generation. If you lose your land, you've lost your honor.
Right.
And then you can put science fiction and fantasy
Right, yeah,
over it,
sure.
right? And like Afrofuturism, it has its own identity. And we will find our own voice when it comes to science fiction and fantasy, hopefully.
So something that you talked about in one of your interviews that I saw was that you wanted your daughter to be able to read science fiction in Arabic, and that's why you started writing Ajwan, right? Why was that? Why was that so important to you, that she'd be able to find things that speak to her in her own language?
In our own language, in Arabic. We have a lot of issues when it comes to the educational system. We either have students that are maybe really good in Arabic and are weak in English, and the other way around, where they're really strong in English and their Arabic is very, very poor. And I know, because it has changed my life, I know that reading fiction made my language stronger, in English, I mean. And of course, I used to read in Arabic as well. And being an Emirati meant that, like most of us, our children are enrolled in private schools. And private schools just always have the best English syllabus, and they have not so strong Arabic syllabus. The Arabic syllabus usually comes from the Ministry of Education that we have. And they don't give them enough fiction. So my children read English books, and then they come home and they see my library, and they, you know, they take some of my books, and usually they're science fiction or fantasy, because that's what I read.
Sure.
And so I thought, you know, they're now 14, 15 or something. I have 4 girls and 2 boys. The boys are older, and, you know, it's too late for them. I was thinking just for the girls. And so I thought maybe I will find young adults books. And I went out and I looked. Maybe I didn't look enough, but whatever I found could never compete with the English science fiction and fantasy that was out there. My husband, for a long time, a lot of years, was saying, you should write. And I always thought, but how would I avoid plagiarism? Taking that same story and making it over and over again. And that stopped me. But then I also had friends who were telling me, it's time for you to write. So I was 45 years old when I started writing, and I chose science fiction. And at the time, I didn't do it consciously. Why I picked science fiction? I picked it because I knew science fiction. How could I possibly write romance or historic, whatever? I didn't read them.
Right.
So I picked science fiction. And also, between you and me, and a lot of people who've already heard this, I had 0 competitors. No one was going to compare me to anyone. So I picked science fiction.
You're the best.
I am the best.
Fantastic.
Right? That's exactly why I chose it. But also, with time, I realized that reading science fiction, even though it was only in English, made me very interested in science. And science, as everyone knows, is evidence-based. And when you base everything on, please present your evidence, and I will then accept this as a truth, as a fact, instead of as opinion, if you present the evidence, then, you know, in science, evidence is the tiebreaker, basically. What if we were to adopt this in our everyday life? What if we were to say, anything you tell me is your opinion unless you provide evidence and proof? And especially during elections, right? Because we have elections too for our parliament. Mm-hmm. And it's always, you know, he's my good friend, so I'm going to vote for him. Right, right. Or, you know, he promised me so-and-so, so I'll vote for him. No, we need to be provided evidence. And so science fiction, to me, would produce a huge number of kids and young people, and obviously then adults, who base their decisions on evidence. Because now they're used to science and they're used to the importance of making those kind of informed decisions. And so science fiction to me is very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it changes our lives and produces better democracies.
Yeah.
Nobody say I mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there have been studies recently that readers are higher in empathy, right?
Yes.
Like the act of reading makes you learn to be more empathetic, and it really is sort of a crazy thing when somebody opens a book. Like it's sort of a radical act of trust. They're saying, I'm going to trust you. Is this going to be worth my time? Are you going to give me back something? When I experience these characters, like the best thing is when readers forget they're reading a book. Yes. And they're transported to another world, and they're in that world until you do something that makes them disbelieve it. You know, and that's where technique comes in. It's like, a woman would never say that. You know, if you read a really bad line, you're like, oh, come on. And all of a sudden you're like, yeah, I'm reading a book. Oh, yeah, it was written by a guy. And you're just like, why am I, you know, I got to put the kids to bed. I got to do something else. But in so many cases, you're going along with this person, they're taking you, and you're like, you know, I'd never thought of this kind of person having this kind of problem. I'd never thought of being in this person's head. Before I came here, I was listening to Letters to a Young Muslim by Omar Saif, Ghobash.
Saif Omar Ghobash. Yeah.
And I am not Muslim, I am not young, and who sends letters anymore? I'm not the intended audience at all. But I was reading this book, and I was like, immediately connected with his wisdom and his humanity and his love for his son and for other sons. And I was like, I know this man's heart. Like how beautiful is this? And he's just talking, and like that's the power of literature. It exposes us to things that we didn't expect, that we didn't even hope for. I was like, this book leaves me hopeful. And I know it's a nonfiction book, but fiction does that too. It does the same thing. It introduces us to characters we would never meet in real life, and it lets us walk in their shoes for a while and experience, like, well, what is it like to do that? Okay, if I made that terrible life choice, what would come next? And could a person like me do a thing like that? How does that go for them? And you can really connect. So when you're talking about people. The writers here maybe not having a lot of good role models. It's like when I wrote my first book, I said, you know what? Writing is a craft. It takes a lifetime to really master, and this is my first book. I said, I am going to make up for my lack of artistry with passion. Like I'm gonna be brave. I'm gonna be courageous in this. And if certain people you know laugh at me because you know. Kyler's so whiny or whatever. It's like other people are going to be like, yeah, I've felt like that before, and I've had that, and I go back and I read that book, and sometimes I cringe at certain times. Oh man, I could have done this so much better. You know, I could have done this and this. But I've had young men say, I felt like that, and you know, I was in war, and I would read this book and I handed it to my buddies because it was hell. and we escaped through this. And I've had guys from prison send me, actual letters. And they say, we hand this around. And it's like, I'm saying something that's true enough to them that they want to reach out to me. I mean, prisoners, like guys that you would write off, and you're like, wait, some prisoners are geeks? I wouldn't have thought that. And so we're making this connection to a human part of us. And you can do that even if your technique is not perfect. If you are brave, if you are willing to tell the truth, if you're willing to take risks that nobody's felt like this, or my friends will make fun of me if they read this. It's like, you know what, tell the truth. Like tell what you really believe.
Which is what made us read books, right?
Yes.
Us.
Yes.
When we started in the beginning, when we were 12 or 13, we read books because of how they made us feel, and how, to me, books allow us to live hundreds of lives, hundreds of choices, their consequences. And then when we meet someone in real life who acts in a certain way or says something, and you go, oh, I know where they're coming from.
Yeah. Right.
And I would deal differently with them than if I didn't know people like that.
Right.
And that's the power of it. And this is why I wanted to ask you next, what is the function of the books that people like you and people like me and people like some in the audience, what is the function of these books? Why do we write them? I mean, obviously, I know why we write them, but why are they important?
Well, I think it's for that reason. It's like what literature does is it's kind of a defiance of death and time. I could read. I was on a panel a few years ago with another author who fairly celebrated, and she was talking about how I do this thing. It deconstructs the narrative because they're making an argument, but the thing undercuts it itself. And I was like, that's great. But Homer did that. That was 2,800 years ago. Like what you're doing is good, but it's not the first time. It's like when Homer talks about warfare, when he talks about loving war, and also how disgusting and awful and terrible it is when he talks about going into a city and wanting to be victorious of them, over them, but also you get to spend some time with the guy as he's putting his armor on, and his wife is helping him, and he's going to go out there and die. And they have this tender moment, and you're like, wait, these are the bad guys, and they're having this tender moment, and this is a war poem. Like it's supposed to be about the Greeks and the heroic age of Greeks, and they're all like, look at my guns, and I'm gonna tell you how great I am. It's like that pathos is there, that deep feeling is like in Homer from 2,800 years ago. He's still connecting with people. It's like, that's beautiful. That connects us. That connects the human spirit across cultures. I don't know. I probably have nothing in common culturally with Homer except for his words there. Like I don't believe in the gods. He did. Et cetera, et cetera. It's like these words that we write can make somebody's life better, as their words made our life better, and they're dead. Like that's beautiful. It's transcendent, and
transcendent.
I hope to reach for that for other people, to leave something good that other people can pick up. So,
well, I have been getting messages, mixed messages actually. Somebody said 5 and somebody said 10. Daisy said 10. I believe Daisy. Okay.
That was your first mistake.
So to wrap up, I had not read the entire essay that you had written. Brent had, which I, by the way, recommend to everyone reading. He wrote an essay on ending well. It's how to wrap up a series, which I'm incapable of doing. I have a 4th book I have to finish. Yet, yes, thank you. He gave me a really good pep talk the other day. Can you very quickly tell us what On Ending Well is about, and how people can use it not only to write books, the last book in a series, but anything, any project that they're doing.
So she says, can I do this briefly? I'm an epic fantasy author. I can't do anything briefly. That's almost 2 million words long, that 5-book series, and I just wrapped it up. And of course, I went over my deadline, I went over my time, and they're like, oh, here's your time. So I will actually try to, I'll try to respect it here today. I'm just going to be repeating myself here, but I'm afraid. It's like everybody has hopes and dreams for what an ending of a series will be. It's why it's so hard to finish. There's certain fantasy series right now that have gone unfinished. And it's because it's really hard to finish fantasy series. Everybody has ways they want it to turn out, and there's only one way it can turn out. And everybody has favorite characters and different favorite characters, and not everybody's going to live happily. And the author might not even think of the best ways. You know, sometimes you read fan theories, or you hear fan theories on YouTube, and you're like, actually, they should have done that. That actually would have been better. And so it's incredibly daunting to finish a series. Yeah, it's not fair. And you just you do the best you can, and you try to take the characters and give them what they deserve, and you try to give the readers what they deserve, which I hope is an exhilarating journey. A great payoff of an end that feels honest and fun, exciting, but also leaves you with some things to really think about. In my last book, I had this. I had a very daunting task. So you've been daunted. I thought 1 or 2 books into the series of 5, I thought this character is the corrupt leader of his religion. What happens if he goes to the mountain where God is, and he climbs the mountain to confront God, and he thinks there's not going to be anybody up there, or if there is, he's gonna shout at him for this crappy system that, pardon me, that God has set up. How could you allow this? So he thinks there's either going to be nobody there, or there's going to be some tyrant up there, and so I had to write that in my last book. He gets up there, and what does he say to the person that he finds there? And who is that person? Is that person, are they there? Are they terrible? Are they what you thought at all? Or are they what you hoped all along? And also, how do you write dialogue for God? So that was my task. I was daunted. Let's say. So I hope in doing things like that, in stretching myself, that I leave readers with something to think about themselves, and not necessarily to take my answers, but to take my questions and say, is that what would happen? Is that who would be there?
A possibility, but. For the people who are incapable of finishing a project, last minute, before we open the floor for questions, what do you say to people who are incapable of finishing a project?
I don't know anybody who's incapable of finishing a project. I only know people who haven't finished yet. Is to write it first without thinking that anybody's going to read it. Like nobody actually has to see your first draft. They don't have to see your second draft. They don't have to see your 5th draft. Just get it done for yourself, because you need to get it done. And when I wrote this book, I wrote the ending of the book. I sent it to my editor and my agent, and they said, it's great. Let's send it to press. And I said, it's not good enough yet. And they said, well, how long do you need to work on it? And I said, they said we can jam the schedule up. You know, we can give you a little bit more time. We can give you another month or 2. And I said, I need another year, because I knew I hadn't written that scene well enough. That scene didn't work. The ending didn't work. It was okay. It filled the promises that I'd made to readers, but it wasn't brilliant. It wasn't true enough. It wasn't something I was going to be proud of. So you know what? I said, I take it back. I need to have it back. I need to work on it more. And so you can work on it more. So get it out there. I needed to get that first draft out there, and be fearless, and tell the things that you're scared to tell. And you can always erase it later if it's the wrong thing, but it's probably not. So So be brave.
Good advice. Because when Brent told me this, he said, no one's going to read it. What are you afraid of? It hasn't been published yet. Just write it, and then you can change it if you want to. Brent, thank you very much. I think maybe if there are any questions, we welcome 2 or 3 questions. Yes? Go on.
Hello, Brent. Hello, Noura. You said earlier on, when you were talking about people throwing
a little closer, yeah.
the book across the room, and you said you hoped you made them feel like that. I think when I write, I'm looking at the character making them do that. So where do you fit in as the author, as opposed to your characters? So I kind of thought, is it me that's making them throw, or is it the characters? Where do you stand on that argument?
Oh, that's tangled, right? Like I don't just let my characters do whatever they want. No. They just make a mess of things. But they have to do what makes sense with who they are. So like if I need the character to make a left turn and they tell me that they're going to turn right, then first I sit there for a really long time and go, can I still get where I need to go if they need to turn right? And then if they really do need to turn left, because if they go right, it's going to take me 2 more books to finish this series. Well, yeah, I could get there, but I'd have to do all this, and I'd lose out on these things, and then it would screw up my timeline, and I have to do this. Then I go, you know what? I also control the character's backstory. So I control their past as well as their, like, they might control their present, but I can go back and I can fix their past. Of course, once you get 5 books into a series, you don't really control as much of their past as you used to. So things get more difficult as you go along. But usually there's like, so this person would definitely not do this. So why would they do this? And sometimes your characters will like I'll sit there and I'll tear my hair out over it. I realized at one point that I sort of had a plot hole between 2 characters, and I'm like, why does this lady who's she's totally masterful, she's always in charge of things, she never lets her emotions get in the way, why is she putting up with this guy who disrespects her? And they've worked together for all these years, and like he's a jerk to her, she's a jerk to him. Like she would not let people do this to her. And I sort of stomped around the house for a few days, like, because it was like, yeah, they wouldn't have done this. And then I was like, she's been in love with him for 20 years. And well, he slept with her sister. You know, so there's been reasons they can't get together. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna have to go change everything. And I went back and I think I changed 2 sentences in the whole book. And it was like, it was sitting there for me. So one, I'm honest with myself when the character wants to do something different, but then I'm in charge. I'm the one who's making this book. And if that choice really is terrible for the whole book, for the whole structure of the story, it's like, I have to fix it. Like at a certain point, if you just let it meander, you know, like you'd make up a subplot and it would just never reconnect with the main plot, and then it'd be like, well, wait, that subplot those characters never actually had anything to do with the main plot, and then you go, well, I'm just that avant-garde, you know? Yes, nobody's ever done that before. So I stay in control. I try. Yeah,
Any more questions? Yes, Isabel.
Thank you so much, Brent and Noura. And I have been having to creep to get back here to hear some of it, so apologies for that. But Brent, you said something really interesting that an agent said to you, and I wanted you to share that with the audience. What is the one thing you know your character wouldn't do?
Yes.
And then, what did he say to you?
Yes.
So that was a lovely story.
Yes. So I went to. So this was when I was young and poor. My wife was supporting me, and we scrimped and saved so that I could go to a writing conference. And it was really hard to spend the $350 to go to this thing. Was just, we almost couldn't do it. So I went. I had my book. It was done. I was ready to pitch it to agents. I'd worked on it. I'd rewritten it. It was finally done. I sit down with one agent. That on paper she looked amazing for me, and she's like wearing lots of crystals and stuff, and she's super weird. And she's a lovely woman. I now actually know her. But like, she was too weird for me at the time, and I was like, I don't think you're for me. And so that was worth knowing that we would not be a good match for each other. And then I sat down with this other agent, gave a talk, sort of like this, but he was talking to these writers, and he said, what is one thing that your main character would never ever do? And he gave us some time to think about it. Okay. Kyler would never betray his master. Okay, you know. And then he goes, now what happens to your book if he does? And I went, oh no. I've got to go back and rewrite this thing, because that's so much better. Like, wait, that makes problems. But those are good problems. And so I went back and I spent another 9 months on that stupid manuscript. And then I sent him this note saying, you said this thing, and it made me. He told me to send in my manuscript, but I said I didn't. You told me this thing, and I had to rewrite. So I rewrote it, and he, like, readers don't care. They don't care how many drafts you went through. They care about what you put in front of their face. So I needed that step. So that's Don Moss. He writes books on writing. He's been a writer himself. He's been in the industry a long time. So if you look up his books, it's Moss, Maass. He has lots of books on writing that are fantastic.
Moss,
Yes.
Maass, if you want to read.
Yes.
And I think you just fixed my book. And in fact, my son has been telling me to do this one thing that I really hated. This person would never do that. And there you go. That's what I needed. Thank you. And
Perfect.
thank you, Isabel, for asking that question. Anybody else wants to? Daisy, do we have enough time?
No, we're all
We
done.
don't have enough time. I'm so
we're-
sorry. Brent, thank you so much for
Yes.
giving us of your
Yes.
time. The insights are very important all across cultures, and not just, English language. Everyone here, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to Abu Dhabi Book Fair and to the Emirates Literature Festival for arranging this. Isabel for calling me and saying, let me introduce you to Brent Weeks. Thank you so much, and hope you come back.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. You're lovely. Yes, thank you very much.